mind me
Oh, no.
stealing the show. Thank you all for coming. More folks showed up than we were expecting. There's a TV monitor in the lobby that is working. We're working on getting sound to it. So if you're standing and would be more comfortable sitting, I'll let you know when that's up and running. We have handouts for fact sheet and frequently asked questions. It looks like we ran out of the fact sheet. All of our handouts are available online at www.stpud.us/groundwater. We're going to go over all the information in the public meeting as well, but just another place to look. And I think with that, we can get going. Thanks, Richard.
Okay. Well, thanks for coming for our discussion of groundwater at the South Y. My name is Richard Solbrig. I'm the General Manager of the South Tahoe PUD. I'll be introducing the key staff here in a moment. What I wanted to start with was giving you a quick agenda as to what we're going to be talking about. After the introductions, I'll be giving you a kind of an overview of the South Y situation, the contaminant of interest that we're talking about, our current situation, and then I'll be turning it over to the individual representatives of the water companies, their topic experts, to talk about what is going on at their agencies. Then we have our engineer here who will be talking about the next steps, the feasibility study that's ongoing. And then at the end, we hope to move through those slides fairly quickly. At the end, we'll be having a robust question and answer period. And in fact, we've got index cards that we'll pass out. We would like you to write down your questions and pass them up as we talk, so then we can take a quick break and look at some of the cards. And I would ask that you hold your questions until that robust period at the end. Otherwise, I'm afraid the conversation is going to be like a balloon with its air coming out. It'll be flying all over the place, and it'll be confusing, and it'll be harder to understand the information, because we are talking about some technical items here. So again, and we have the 3x5 cards available so that so that you won't forget your question by the end of the presentations, and you can write them down. So anyway, with that, I'll do the introductions. As I said, my name is Richard Solbrig, the General Manager for the South Tahoe PUD, and we have our topic area experts up here as Jennifer from the Lukens Water Company, Rick from the Tahoe Keys Water Company, Ivo from the South Tahoe BUD, and then Sashi from Kennedy Jenks Consultants, who is the engineering company that's doing the study that we'll be talking about, and she'll be talking about in depth later. So the first thing I want to say is that the water that you are receiving from any of the public water agencies, particularly the ones that are here, is meeting drinking water standards. So if your question is, do I need to buy bottled water at home because the water coming out of my tap isn't safe to drink, the answer is no, you don't need to. So that's the first thing I wanted to say, and probably the most important thing. Based upon sources, treatment, inner ties, the water you're drinking from the public water companies is safe to drink. So now we talk about what's the source of water for drinking water. Well, as you can see, on the South Shore, on the California side, groundwater is over 99% of the water. The Lakeside Mutual Water Company does have a lake intake. They're that fraction. The rest of the water from your public water companies is from the ground. And then when you look at the groundwater, it's in terms of so who's using the groundwater? Well, the South Tahoe Public Utility District is the largest of the water companies. Over 80% is used by the South Tahoe PUD to provide to our customers. Then there's 10% to the Tahoe Keys, 5% to the Lukens Water Company, and then the remaining is about 1% to some small community water systems that were probably drilled many years ago and are serving several houses or businesses in a particular area located around one well. That's about 1%. And then the 2% is we actually have hundreds of private wells, individual wells on people's property, and that's the 2%. That's where the groundwater supply is being delivered to. Now here's a picture of our groundwater basin. Obviously that's the South Shore of Lake Tahoe. There's a lake at the top. And that outline, the blue outline, is the boundaries of the Tahoe Valley South Groundwater Basin. That's the name that the state of California has given our basin. It's about 25 square miles in area. And obviously it starts very narrowly up at the south end in Christmas Valley and slowly widens as you get towards the lake. At the lake boundaries, it's almost out to Cascade Lake and to the state line. And so what all the blue dots represent is sort of a nice depiction of where all the wells are. And this basin, groundwater basin, has basically deposits of material of clays, silts, sands, and gravels that have been laid down over thousands and thousands of years. That's what makes up the groundwater basin itself in terms of the material. And because of that material, it's very productive and very, some of the groundwater areas in there are very productive for delivering groundwater, high supply, very productive. So, and then if you look at that map, you can see, well, the boundary is kind of narrow. If you think in terms of where the watershed is, out to the crests of the mountains, the recharge area from the surrounding watersheds is very large, even larger than the basin itself. So what that means is that there's an excellent supply of water, excellent water quality going into that groundwater basin. And so because of the availability, and the groundwater is fairly shallow and most of the area is very accessible, as the community has developed, there's a very high reliance on wells. And unfortunately, what that also means is that with the same properties of the groundwater basin being productive, it's also subject and susceptible to contamination. And if you look at where the wells are located, they're actually located along, many of them right along the main thoroughfare of Highway 50 through town, where most of the commercial businesses are located, which are the potential sources of contamination from past practices. So the proximity to the sources and the ease of the flow of the groundwater in the basin is what makes the contamination potential large, and in fact was the reason why the state declared this basin a medium priority basin when they passed their groundwater legislation a couple of years ago and grouped basins into low, medium, and high priorities. Even though we have plenty of water, because of the susceptibility to contamination and some legacy contaminants, which we'll be talking about one tonight, it's a medium priority basin.
Could you tell us what the dots are? I can't read the legend there.
Okay, the dark blue large dots with the crosses in them are the public water system wells. The light blue dots with the circle in them are the small water system wells. And then the blank light blue dots are the domestic wells. And then we'll get, I think there's a map that will show the service areas for the agencies. Well, you can kind of see it on this one, but there's a map later in terms of what the district boundaries are. The Lukens service area and the Tahoe service, there's a map in a couple slides that's actually much clearer than this one. So what is tetrachloroethylene, or PCE as we refer to it? It was a chemical manufactured chemical used for degreasing and for dry cleaning. Started use in the 1940s, the peak use by about the 1970s, very, very prolific in the industry, particularly as a dry cleaning solvent. And then in the 1980s, the concern started being developed for its potential for health problems if people are exposed to this material. And so with a bunch of studies and tests, by 1989, the United States Environmental Protection Agency actually established the maximum contaminant level, or MCL, for PCE in drinking water at 5 parts per billion. And at 5 parts per billion, it's about a drop in a large tanker truck. That's what constitutes about 5 parts per billion. So now, how did PCE kind of get into the groundwater? Well, we think just by the practices back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, nobody was aware of the dangers of the chemical. So it was basically loosely handled, you might say, thrown into dumpsters, kind of nobody paid much attention if there was little spills on the ground, or liquid was coming out of the dumpsters. And so because of its chemical nature, once it got spilled on the ground, it started soaking into the ground, and then through repeated cycles of rainwater and snow melt and shallow groundwater going up and down, the material started becoming entrained in the groundwater table. And again, as a chemical property, it's heavier than water. So once it gets into the water and starts moving with the groundwater, it actually sinks in the groundwater. And so that's important when you're actually going decades later to look for it, to know that chemical property, that it's actually sinking as it moves away from the source area. Now, for the same reason that it's not completely soluble in water, that also is a plus because there are very established means for removing it from water once it's in there. And some of the treatment methods will be mentioned later by some of our speakers. So now this is the current situation. As you can, to orient you, there's the lake right at the bottom of the green area where the circle is, that's the South Y area, which is the area where the PCE got spilled and started getting into the groundwater. What I call the taupe area is the South Tahoe PUD service area. The light green is the Lukens Water Company service area. The purple is the Tahoe Keys Water Company service area. The blue arrow represents the general flow of groundwater in that area. And so that dashed almost triangle is the approximate known limits of PCE currently in the groundwater. It began down at the South Y area, and if you notice those little triangles or hexagons, you can see the district suffered some problems with their wells back in the 1889, 90. They were detected in the district wells. The gray items are old, destroyed wells. The district just eliminated them, and the yellow ones are inactive wells of the districts. Then if you go into the Lukens area, you can see they have they have a destroyed well, and then they have, look from your perspective, it looks like two red dots, but actually the one is a double. There's two wells on one lot. They have three wells that have been, where PCE has been detected in those wells. And then there's two out of the three Tahoe Keys wells have also shown detections of PCE. And in terms of the impairment to the public systems, if you take the summation of all the wells that have been that have had a problem with it, the total available water production has been reduced by 3.25 million gallons a day. That's about 5,000 average California households. So that's our current situation as it exists on the ground today. So what I'll do now is I'll turn it over to the individual speakers from the water companies to have them tell you in much more detail what the water companies have been doing. And so Jennifer's going to be the first speaker. Yeah. Did you get the cards in?
Okay. Thank you, Richard, for that great introduction. My name is Jennifer Lukens. I'm with Lukens Brothers Water Company, and I'm here to discuss with you what Lukens is doing to address the PCE situation in our water system. So originally in the summer of 2014 was the initial detection over the MCL. At that time, we immediately shut down our wells, and we opened our emergency interties that had been intertie single with South Tahoe Public Utility District to supplement the water loss from the two wells that we shut down. And then we also remain online with our current well number 1, which has been at non-detect since, historically it's been at non-detect. So then right after that, we started meetings with Lahontan Regional Water Quality Control Board. And then we also started having meetings with State Water Resources Control Board, Division of Financial Assistance. We also met a lot with the sanitary engineers for State Water Resources Control Board. We started our preliminary engineering report for water system improvements to address the PCE contamination. They evaluated 5 different treatment possibilities that would best be suited for Lukens. In the end, we decided, with the recommendations from the State Water Board, to go with the best available treatment technology of granulated activated carbon filtration systems. That's the same type of filtration system that Tahoe Keys Water currently uses. So it's applied in the basin and used and very successful. So we then began the engineering process for that treatment plant at the 12th Street site. And then at the same time, back in May 2015, we applied for a planning grant from the Division of Financial Assistance to help pay for that. It's an estimated $140,000 design and engineering process. In July 2017, we were awarded that grant. We're just now finishing up the plans and specifications for the treatment plant. We're at about 90% right now. And we have since submitted an application to the California Department of Water Resources for a construction grant as well. We've also submitted for a construction loan as well to hopefully gap, which bridge the cost so we could build the treatment plant before the grant actually comes in, because it is a very lengthy process to receive grant funds. As you can tell, from May 2015 to July 2017, it took to get our planning grant approved. So it is a time-consuming process. That construction is estimated at approximately $2.2 million. So, you know, the grant coming in sooner would be better for us. We're anticipating the construction of the GAC facility at the end of this summer, so September 2018, and then they'll build through the winter in order to get the system online as soon as possible. We have also submitted last month to the California Department of Water Resources for a feasibility study to determine potential future locations for water source within the Lukens district. So it's a comprehensive study to take a look at the best possible locations for 2 future water sources. So they will take into consideration effects on the PCE contamination, where is a safe place to drill a well, so that we can look for that in the future. And that is all I have, so I'll turn it over to Rick Robillard with Tahoe Keys Water. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Just want to thank everyone for coming out, this large audience, to address this very important topic. I'd especially like to thank STPUD and Lukens and Kennedy Jenks for their efforts thus far. And what I want to do tonight is just briefly discuss how PCE has impacted the Tahoe Keys Water Company, historically, presently, and potentially in the future. So 2009, PCE was detected in the Tahoe Keys well number 2 and was exceeding the MCL and was required by the state of California to be shut down. So after several years of planning and construction, the Tahoe Keys installed a granular activated carbon filtration system to remove that PCE. That carbon filtration system significantly limited the well number 2 pumping capacity from its original capacity. So moving forward to 2016, PCE was detected in the Tahoe Keys Company's well number 1 below the state required MCL. So if that well exceeds the MCL of the state, it'll be required to be shut down, as did well number 2 in 2009. So 1 year later, the Tahoe Keys Water Company hired an engineering consultant to develop a facilities plan to further address the PCE contamination and provide alternatives to deliver safe, reliable water to the Tahoe Keys customers. Alternatives vary from a centralized treatment plant to new wells, to installing larger granular activated carbon systems, all to address and deliver safe, reliable water. And that's the ultimate goal here to the public. So, lastly, I would just like to mention that this is going to take a large collaborative effort in order to be successful to address the PCE contamination, which spreads along 3 water agencies. So, I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight. So, thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ivo Bergson. I'm the hydrogeologist for South Tahoe Public Utility District. And as you saw on the initial slides, as Richard discussed, the district was impacted by PCE contamination beginning when we first started sampling for PCE in 1989. And so the impacts that we had to our water system occurred mostly during the 1990s. And again, we're still being impacted. We have a mutual aid agreement with Lucan Brothers Water Company in Tahoe Keys. So the water that we produce for our customers, we're sharing again with, or we're the backstop for Lucan Brothers and, if necessary, Tahoe Keys. The district has a very large vested interest in protecting and maintaining our groundwater resources. As you saw, we're the largest producer of drinking water within the Tahoe Basin. We're 100% reliant on groundwater to meet the drinking water needs of the community. Again, this is a shared resource that's used by everybody. Okay, it's used not just by the district, it's used by the Keys, it's used by Lucan Brothers, it's used by private well owners, anybody that has a water well in the basin, we're all taking out of a common resource. And so because we have such a strong interest in maintaining that resource, with the new groundwater management regulations that came out in 2015, the district elected to serve as the groundwater sustainability agency for the basin, along with its many roles of being a sewer and water utility provider. This was something on top of that. And what a sustainability agency is it's a planning and implementation agency. So we're not a regulatory body. But there are things that we have to do, or that we do, and we've been doing these for a number of years. First of all, we're responsible for developing a groundwater management plan, and we have done that. We updated the plan in 2014. And we don't just generate this document. There are actions and such that are goals that we have to, again, maintain the resource, and these are basin management objectives. And we have 8 basin management objectives within our groundwater management plan. And the first 2 relate to what we are talking about today. Number 1 on our list is maintain a long-term groundwater supply. And the second thing is to maintain and protect groundwater quality. And so the things that we do as a GSA all kind of revolve around these basin management objectives. So we do groundwater studies and investigations. We also do basin monitoring, which we've been doing for a number of years. And we collect this information in order to identify what the local groundwater concerns are, to our resource, and try to develop solutions to address those problems. Some of the things that we also do that's very important is we go out and we take this information and we try to leverage that information to obtain grant funding. And so we've been doing this for this problem since 2015. So we've been working on this for a couple years, and we probably spent to date over $250,000 on groundwater studies, investigations, and pursuing funding. Fortunately, we've been successful in getting funding through the state of California through Proposition 1. And we're in the process right now of negotiating the final agreement with the state of California. The total cost, the monies that the district has already spent on groundwater studies and investigations, you can leverage as a match as part of that grant fund. And the total dollar amount right now is around $1 million to do the studies and investigations for this item, which we're calling a feasibility study. And what Sachi Itagaki with Kennedy Jenks Consultants will follow me, and she will discuss about the about the feasibility study. And I just want to invite you to stay engaged. We want to hear your comments. We want to keep you guys involved in the process. On the sign-in sheet, the reason for the sign-in sheet is, we'd like to get your contact information so we could send out information by email, or if you have, if you have questions and such, we'd be happy to provide you our phone numbers. But this is the first workshop. We plan on having another workshop in several months, in June probably, give you an update as to what we're doing with the investigation, how that's moving forward. And then towards the end of the year, when we get to the point where we have a recommended plan and solution, when that's going to be out in draft form, we'll notify everybody that it's there. Again, give you an opportunity to provide comments on that plan. And, I'm sure there are things that, from your point of view, that we need to consider that maybe we missed. We want to hear that. We need to, again, get to a solution that works for Tahoe Keys, Lucan Brothers, the district, the whole community, to take care of this problem. So that's it for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Evo. I'm going to have to bring this down. Hopefully I'm not going to wreck it. There you go. Great. So as Evo mentioned, this Southwide feasibility study that Kennedy Jenks Consultants is working on was developed through a grant application process with the state of California, with the State Water Resources Control Board, Division of Financial Assistance. And the purpose of the study is to look at the feasibility of intercepting the groundwater and the contamination before it gets to those wells at Lucan's and for Tahoe Keys. Is there a way for us to really look and remove more of that source contaminant before it flows down gradient, as Richard showed in that graphic? And the main elements of the study are threefold. The public outreach, which we're doing now, which Evo mentioned, we'll be doing additional outreach presentations so that you all are informed about what's going on. And then there's a pre-design investigation. This is actually something that we weren't originally envisioning when we submitted the original grant application, but the state came back and said, hey, we might have some extra money if you want to do this. And so this is the phase of the project that's kind of most active right now. And we prepared a work plan that we've worked with our technical advisory committee. Those are folks from Lahontan, from the state of Division of Financial Assistance, and the state's Division of Drinking Water, as well as many of the technical people here. And the purpose of that technical advisory committee and this work plan is to get their input on how we are going to do the investigation. I'll talk a little bit about what is actually going to be involved. So we're going to get work plan comments back shortly, and we're in the process of moving that investigation along. And once we have that information, then we're going to advance into the feasibility study phase. And the feasibility study has three main components over there to the right. One is to look at the various alternatives for both treatment, whether it's soil or groundwater, and then how do you dispose of it? Can we use that water that we treat and deliver it? So there's some constraints from a regulatory perspective about levels of contaminants. So we really are going to have to do this investigation to understand that better. And then once we have some refined alternatives, then we'll be defining what facility needs. What are we going to need to build? Are we going to need to build pipelines, pump stations, storage, treatment? And we'll, define that more closely and estimate the costs of building and operating those facilities, because this is one of the things that, long-term operations is going to be important in terms of, trying to make sure we optimize for cost. And then finally, once we have that information, we'll be developing an implementation plan for that recommended alternative. So, both from a technical engineering perspective, a financial perspective, planning and permitting, all of those things will go into an implementation plan. So what's coming up? Well, as I mentioned, there's an investigation that we're proposing. It will be comprised of drilling a test well, and then testing the aquifer properties. Richard mentioned, the sand and gravel aquifers. So we want to know in the location of where we're proposing the test well, how much pumping can we get? how much extraction can we get? Because that will help us understand how big a treatment system might we have to put on. How long might it take to start knocking that PCE concentration down? One of the components of the feasibility study is actually groundwater modeling. So the Desert Research Institute has been working with EVO and the district on developing a groundwater model more specific to this area. And so they've done some initial work now, and we'll be using the information from both the feasibility study as well as the different samples that have been collected over time to help us predict, if we were to take this action, what would happen in the long term. So we run the simulations for maybe 50 years. So where we are focusing our studies right now is in the vicinity of 5th Street and Eloise. And so, as Richard pointed out, I don't know if there's a pointer on there, there's the green area, which is the very corner of Lukens Brothers, and then there's the mauve area, pink area, which is right by the South Y. And so there's a cluster of wells there because the South Y area is about where the PCE releases occurred back in probably the 60s and 70s. And so the arrow that Richard showed going towards the lake, that's the way that the groundwater is moving. And so we're looking at this area of intercept, as it were. And right now, we're focusing in on 2 properties in that vicinity of 5th Street and Eloise, with the hope that we can work with Liberty Utilities and the City of South Lake Tahoe. Some of you might know the utility office there at, I think, 933 Eloise, and the property next door is 953. And there's a stormwater detention basin there. So that area, that polygon in red, is a possible work area. The drill rig that we're planning to use is actually a very small footprint, probably about 3 parking spaces. The duration of the drilling and the testing and all of that's hopefully not more than a couple weeks, but on the outside we're looking at about a month. And so we're, right now EVO is working with Liberty Utilities on understanding their needs for access to the parking lot and the property and such. And so we're kind of advancing that drilling program and the planning for that. So, and once we know better, we'll be doing some outreach to the neighbors immediately there, just because, people are concerned and want to know what's going on. So, and the hope is that we can get all of this investigative work, the field work, done by, the June timeframe. So the hope is that we're going to be doing this drilling probably March, April, and we'll be finishing up the field reports and things like that within the June timeframe. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Richard to wrap up.
So maybe in the meantime, you can start passing your cards up if you've got questions. Start collecting that up. I think we've covered pretty much what the next steps are. There's going to be, that pre-design investigation that Kennedy Jenks is performing, including some groundwater modeling with the information from the drilling program and with the Desert Research Institute's model that they've developed. And then we'll start using that information to develop those options. And so the next public workshop, probably when we talk about what we found, will be in June. We'll do the same kind of advertising, invite everybody to come down, and then as we've already talked about, then later in the process, when we actually have some alternatives zeroed in on, later in the year we'll reconvene and get your input again. So that's all part of the plan process with the state of California's grant process. So, and so to help answer questions, we do have some staff from the Lahontan Regional Water Quality Control Board here. And I wanted to thank the city for letting us use the council chambers. We have a couple of the city council members here, Wendy David and Brooke Lane back there. And so appreciate, like I say, appreciate having this facility to use. So if we've got any questions coming up, has everybody written down their questions? Want to take just a couple of minutes? The bathrooms are across the entry past the little fireplace. And as we gather these, we'll organize them, and then we'll just come back, or you can just take a breather while we get a little organized with the questions.
All right, we're going to get started. the meeting is going to conclude at 7:30. If there's so we're going to try to answer all the questions that were submitted in the time we have. We're going to be wrapping up at 7:30, so we've got about 35 minutes to get through them. And if there are questions that weren't addressed that are lingering after the meeting, there's business cards up front, and also our website has stpud.us/groundwater. It's on the handout sheets as well. Has additional information. So hopefully we can get through as many as possible, but ways to contact us if not. You guys ready?
Sure.
Okay.
I'll start with a few here. The question is, are Proposition 1 funds available for remediation? We believe so. The plan is certainly to apply for construction funds when we get done with the feasibility study. But that's a lengthy process with the state of California. Second question, what are the surrounding states' MCL levels? The 5 micrograms per liter is a national US EPA standard, so all states have to meet that same MCL. Question, is there a remediation plan for the DNAPL, which is what PC is, from Frank DeLuce? That's what we're hoping to develop as part of this feasibility study, is exactly how to deal with remediate the contamination in the groundwater.
Well, that wasn't my question. The DNAPL is the liquid phase, not the dissolved phase.
I would defer to Scott on that one.
Say that again.
Repeat the
Yes,
question
the
for Scott.
I know you're going to be doing the dissolved phase. What are you doing for the DNAPL, the material in liquid phase that's settled at the bottom because of its density?
Part of my name's Scott Ferguson. I'm with the Lahont Water Quality Control Board. Part of our investigation, that's part of the cleanup and abatement order that we've issued to, at this point, the Lake Tahoe Laundry Works, is geared towards identifying the full lateral and vertical extent of the contamination that's migrated. So we're looking to go both down and out in our investigation, and that would be the contamination that has migrated from that site. Does that answer your question?
Well enough.
Okay.
Do you even know the full extent to contamination yet regarding that matter, since it's in 2 phases, the contaminant?
Could you repeat the question real quick?
So do we even know the extent of contamination, considering that it does occur in 2 phases?
I think it's probably still being evaluated. Again, I'll get into a couple other questions here later on, but and also just evaluating if there are other sources. So as that progresses, the investigation work will likely expand also.
Another question, is there any possibility that South Lake Tahoe could trade groundwater rights for surface water rights in Lake Tahoe? There is that possibility, although it would be a very, very long process. In fact, the district staff has a phone call tomorrow morning, literally, with the State Water Resource Control Board staff to talk about our water rights, which we actually inherited when we bought the private water companies in South Lake Tahoe. And we actually have water rights, surface water rights are kind of in suspension. There'd be the possibility of moving in that direction. It would take a long time. Take a long time to perfect the water rights and then to actually design surface water treatment plants, which would be required to pull water out of either the lake or the Upper Truckee River. I'll just do 2 more I have. Who do we call for tests for possible lead in our pipes coming into our homes? And is lead a current concern? Lead is not a concern. Our staff, having been out there for years, is not aware of any lead service lines. The only lead that potentially is out there is if you have fixtures, water faucets and stuff in your home that was purchased in the probably early 1980s, the solder that was used on those facilities tend to leach out lead, and so that would be in your home one way until, if you wanted to call, you could call our laboratory, the district's laboratory, for to have somebody come out and take a sample, but send it off to a certified lead lab. But one thing while you're doing that is if you just run your water, for like when you get up in the morning, or if you haven't used water out of a tap, if you just run the water for a minute, all the water that's sitting in that fixture, maybe potentially accumulating lead over the hours, will just be washed away. And that's why when we test for lead, we go out and we actually do a first draw in the morning, hopefully with an 8-hour period where no water's been used in the house. So again, if you're concerned, just flushing your fixture before you use it for drinking or cooking will take care of the problem in the meantime. And then is maybe a difficult question. What about those of us who have been, it says, how often are wells checked? What about Myers and Christmas Valley? Well, as far as we know, there's no PC out in Myers, and Christmas Valley never showed up out there in the wells. And the frequency is dependent upon whether the PC has showed up there or not. We test when we're in the program monthly. It says, what about those of us who have been drinking water contaminated before it was discovered? Understand that the drinking water standard is based upon a very long-term exposure. In fact, the statistics that are used when the EPA establishes basically drinking the water for something like 20 years as your own water supply in the 5 micrograms per liter is what would constitute, a negligible potential for having cancer caused by the drinking water. So if you've drunk it, even something exceeding the MCL for a short period of time, the chances of having, which the next question is, what recourse do we have for compensation for physical damage to our health? Basically, the statistics are you're not going to suffer any problem. It's not like a microbial, bacterial thing where you get sick right away. This is a 20-year exposure kind of issue that's being discussed. So if you've drunk it, a few times, it's not. The chances of it causing a problem is minuscule. So that's all the questions I have.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I have a really long pile of questions here. And then part of one of mine goes along with that. What are the risks of my family for having consumed Lucan's water prior to the discovery of PCE and the closure of the wells? The wells were tested annually, so it was within a year. So it was a very short period of time that there was a potential for exposure. And also consider that Lucan's was operating 3 wells, so there was a blending of water as well. So the risk is very, very minimal, but I do encourage you, if you do have questions about health-related issues, to contact the State Water Resources Control Board, the Division Sanitary Engineer. My business cards are on the counter, and I can give you their contact information, and they can discuss that with you in further detail. Where were the 2 wells, exact location that Lucan shut down in 2014? They are both located on the same parcel on 12th Street, at the end of 12th Street, near Tahoe Island in Anita. I also wanted to mention that all 3 of the water systems, well, I'll speak for Lucan's, and then the other 2 water systems can make their own comments. We test in accordance with Title 22 with the State Water Resources Control Board and the EPA, and have never been out of compliance for testing violations. So we take water quality monitoring very, very seriously. And I drink the water. I lived in the water system for a number of years. You guys are my friends and family. I personally take that very seriously, and I know the other water systems do as well. Next question is, why do we as Lucan's customers have to foot the bill through increased fees for these studies? What is being done to help us keep the water rates low? Actually, for the studies, you are not paying for that. That was a grant funded. So that was a $140,000 grant that we received that we're using for the preliminary engineering report, as well as for all the design work on that, on the GAC project. And what are we doing to keep the water rates low? I can say for certain, and everyone up here can understand that, I do all the work. I do all of the grant writing. We in-house as much as we can. We have 3 employees, 2 full-time, 1 part-time, that handle all of the billing and everything. And so I do the grant writing, I do the regulatory work, I do the accounting. So we really try to keep our overhead costs as low as possible. That's what I do to try and keep your water rates as low as possible, is keep our operating overhead as low as possible. Why didn't the California Public Utilities Commission respond to my letter of protest regarding the Lukens rate increase? The CPUC's policy when dealing with letters of protest is they forward them to the water company office and then give the water company an opportunity to address the protests and hopefully do that in a sufficient manner. If for some reason I do not address the issue sufficiently, then the PUC will then step in. If you have a specific issue you would like to discuss with the California Public Utilities Commission, please take my business card and drop me an email or see me after the meeting, and I'll get your contact information and send you a direct contact to the Public Utilities Commission that can answer your questions. It's much easier if I direct you to the right person in the right department. Otherwise, there's a good chance you could get lost within that organization because it is quite large. These 2 questions kind of go hand in hand. Do the households that are closest to the contamination or contaminated wells get that water, or is all the water in the city the same? That is, so for Lukens Brothers Water Company, you are receiving a combination of South Tahoe Public Utility District water and water from Lukens Well Number 1, which is non-detect for PCE contamination. And then I'll let Rick address that to Tahoe Keys Water. And just so you know, again, I'll reiterate that all of the water that all of our customers receive at their homes meet drinking water standards. It's safe to drink. Can carbon filters on drinking fountains, water purifiers filter out PCEs? Again, the water you're receiving through drinking fountains meets drinking water standards. So I guess you could look into installing a carbon filter on your home if that's something you're interested in, but it's an expense that isn't warranted at this time. We would have to provide notification if for some reason your water did not meet drinking water standards. Sorry, I really did get a big pile of, of cards here. For Lukens, with recent rate increases for PCE, how feasible is it for Lukens to proceed with construction of meters, fire hydrants, infrastructure? What is the possibility of changing to the city? So the first part of the question, currently all of our infrastructure is on hold. All of the infrastructure replacement projects are on hold because the GAC treatment and the PCE contamination is our top priority. We did have, or do have, it's still in the works, about a $2.1 million grant going through the State Water Resources Control Board to continue our construction. That would be a 100% grant funded project. I know that there's a little bit of confusion about that. So we are not taking out additional loans at this time or foresee it in the future for any sort of infrastructure replacement. Everything is being done to focus on this PCE contamination. If for some reason the grant for the infrastructure replacement does go through, we would proceed with that construction at that time, but that's only if the grant funds come through. And what is the possibility of changing to the city? I'm assuming that means what is the possibility of changing to South Tahoe PUD or Tahoe Keys, and that really is not a possibility at this time. There's territories, boundaries that give South Tahoe PUD their territory, Tahoe Keys Water their territory, and Lukens Water their territory. The boards have always had open communications about the possibility of consolidation or acquiring in that time, and at this time it's still considered not a feasible solution in the best interest of the ratepayers. Do you want to?
One specific comment. One of the things that you certainly aren't aware of unless you've been dealing with the State Water Resources Control Board, their grant system, is that Lukens is a small water company with 950 customers. That puts them in a position of pursuing grant funding that the utility district with its 14,000 water customers is not eligible for. So if you think of the community as a whole, Lukens has a much better chance of pulling in grant funding from Sacramento than if they were part of the district. So, in terms of, again, big picture, I think the community is better off with Lukens pursuing those grant funding options.
And then just a couple of things to piggyback on what Richard said. Lukens is in quite a predicament right now as a result of contamination that was of no fault of Lukens or its customers. It's a third-party contamination, and Lahontan is actively pursuing a responsible party that will be held responsible for this contamination. If it weren't for this contamination, Lukens would be a totally fine, solvent, operating utility. So the compromising position that we have been put in is not a result of our own. We were also aggressively pursuing grant funds. I still am aggressively pursuing grant funds for infrastructure rehabilitation and was getting approved for many of them. And like Richard said, those would all be 100% grant awards, which means that the burden of infrastructure upgrades would not be on the customers. With the completion of the 1.5 phases of infrastructure upgrades that we did do, we increased the fire protection in our water system by 48% in one project. So there have been substantial increases to the utility and improvements to the utility. You may not see them, but they do happen. So my last one, you guys. How often are the separate water systems output monitored? If this question is regarding production is recorded daily, if not more than that, on the various water systems. Does anyone else have anything to add to that one? Okay. How often is the mix of 3 water systems? There really is not a mix of 3 water systems. Currently, Lukens has an open intertie with South Tahoe PUD, so that's 2. That has been ongoing since July 2014. And then in the event that Tahoe Keys would have to open their emergency intertie, that would be separate. So I don't think that there would ever be a mixing of all 3 unless we came into some sort of a regional project in the near future. And then this last question I'll direct to Evo or Scott because it's out of my realm. What is the maximum groundwater monitoring well concentration of PCE?
Well, I'll take that. So last summer, the most recent data that has been collected showed up to 1,000 parts per billion of PCE, again in that area over by Eloise and 5th Street.
Well, you've definitely got a DNAP for there at the bottom. A liquid phase, right?
Yeah, it's pretty close to that kind of tipping point as far as the percent that you'd find in as a dissolve phase, a dissolve concentration, where you start thinking about having a liquid phase as well.
So I'll go ahead and address the comment or the question referred to me from Jennifer. It says, do the households that are closest to the contaminated wells get that water, or is all the water in the city the same? So addressing the Tahoe Keys water system, all the water that's delivered to the Tahoe Keys water system meets the state's requirements. The way that the system is ran, that well number 1, which has the detections below the MCL, is the last well to operate under a demand system. So the way that we run the system is well number 3 is our lead well, and that's supplying most of the drinking water, and then well number 2, which is of the JC filtrated water, and then well number 3. So you have a blending going on. You're not necessarily, but all the water that's delivered to the system meets the state's requirements.
Richard, could I say something? Do you mind if I? Go ahead. My name is Dwayne Wallace. I'm on the STPUD board. I wanted to make sure everyone understood that the water companies actually tried to put this meeting together along with the city to make sure that everything is being done by Lahontan and others to move this problem forward. I live on 12th Street and I drink the water readily because of what I know as a STPUD board member and from Lahontan. The water is safe. However, the PCE plume moves around and it's cost the community a lot from us having to shut down wells and things. So this is a way to let the public know what's going on ahead of any problems. But I drink the water all the time, and other than a slight twitch, everything's okay. So and when it comes to using water out of the lake, Lakeside Mutual does have a small plant that they draw water from the lake, and some of our board members have thought of approaching them and maybe upgrading their system. But the other water systems are their own water systems, and our board has never felt like we had the right or the inclination or financial ability to put the burden on our own ratepayers to buy other water systems or to take them over. Maybe the state could force us to, but it's not something we wanted to do. But we do want to solve the problem. And so collectively, we have interties that help us keep our water safe, and it is. But we wanted to let you know what's going on and make sure that the public helps us put the emphasis in all the right directions to get something done about it.
This one's for the Tahoe Keys. Since contamination and filtration 2012-2015, what costs have been passed on to customers on average single-family home? So unfortunately, I don't have exact dollar amounts. That was prior to my time, and then also I don't have that information available. I did consult with some audience members who are Tahoe Keys customers, and I was told that it was a 10 to 15% one-time increase in 2012 as a water assessment. So that's it. Pass it over to Evo. Yep.
Okay, I have 3 cards here. Who tests the water and what are their certifications? I can only speak for the district. The district has a lab in itself that takes care of our water and wastewater testing needs. They are fully California certified. They're heavily regulated, and as far as specific certifications that they have and for the types of analysis that they're certified to do, I recommend that you contact the district lab directly and talk to Terry Powers, our lab director, and he'll be able to give you that information. For analyses that the lab is not certified to do, they handle it through their laboratory procedures. They work under what's known as a quality assurance plan, and so they follow that, and they'll send it out to a outside lab that is certified to do that analysis. Where are the reports available for viewing? As far as laboratory analysis, the district is a public agency, so that data is all readily available. Again, if you are so inclined, you can ask Terry, you can talk with Terry directly, and we'd be happy to share those reports with you. Of course, you do get in mailers, you get every year, you get the consumer confidence reports that give you an annual rundown on gives you a general rundown on water quality for each particular water system. But again, if you're looking for more than that, then I'd recommend that you contact the district lab directly. Are the results verified by an independent third-party lab? Typically, we do not do that. I mean, that's an additional cost. Our lab is run by dedicated professionals that, that's their life, is doing analysis, collecting samples in a proper way, and performing the analysis. So again, if an independent third-party lab, you could bring that up with Terry if that's ever done. I don't think that we typically do that. When was the feasibility study approved within your organizations? Again, I can only speak for the district. The district received a notification, a notice of a preliminary award in March of 2017 for the Prop 1 grant And we brought that to our board, and they passed a resolution that allowed staff to move forward with pursuing that grant in, I believe it was April of 2017, the following month. Is there a larger, more detailed map available to view? Of course there is. We will, Sachi mentioned the work plan that is in progress. When we have that work plan completed, it will be posted up onto the district's website, and we will make that information available to you when that is posted, and you'll see a lot more detail and background information as far as the hydrogeologic setting and the contamination that's occurring in the South Y area. So I'd suggest that you look out for the work plan.
FAQ is also already up there, right? That's one of the other handouts.
Yeah, right. Right, but I mean, there are also smaller maps.
There's lots of maps.
Yeah, there are lots of maps, and again, if you need a much larger map, give us a call and we'd be happy to provide you one. What's that?
Put it on more than one page.
Well, no, we would just, it would be a one page, but it might be like 34 by 17 size, something like that, It would be much larger size than 8.5 by 11. That's it.
I have a question, a clarification, a question that I asked. How often is the final blend that goes to the customers analyzed for VOCs? Monthly, weekly, annually? What is the actual sampling schedule?
Okay, the district samples its wells at the source before it goes into the distribution system. And then the interties are taking water from the distribution system. Currently, we do not have any wells with PCE contamination in them. So the water that we're providing to Lucan Brothers through the intertie is, I think with pretty high confidence, I could say that it's PCE free.
How often is it sampled?
Excuse me?
What phase?
What phase?
What phase of PCE?
There is no dissolved phase PCE in the water. So there are no detectable amounts of PCE within the water that's running through our distribution system.
I can't speak for South Tahoe PUD or Tahoe Keys Water, but for Lucan's, our testing schedule for wells 2 and 5 were annually, and the testing schedule for well 1 was every 4 years, and that's because well 2 and 5 had previously had a trace detection of PCE contamination. So we sampled those every year, and well number 1 was every 4 years was our monitoring schedule. Since the discovery of the contamination, Lucan's has voluntarily started testing well number 1 every year, and we also test a number of private wells in our water system every year to watch out for any movement of the plume towards well 1. So I don't know, we all follow state testing, but the state assigns different wells, different testing protocols. As I mentioned, we have 3 wells with 2 different testing protocols.
I understand that this is part of Title 22, but isn't it a little lean to be testing a well every year when you know there could be potential contamination entering the system at any time?
So I can go ahead and address what the Tahoe Keys does associated with your question, related to your question. So on well number 2, which has the granular activated carbon filtration system, we do a pretty robust testing system when we're running that. And what we do is we test the influent weekly, and we test in between each vessel, because those vessels are put in lead and lag, and we test that in between there as well. And then we also test the effluent. So essentially what would happen is if you had PCE, you would have breakthrough through the first vessel first, and then we would shut the well down. Well number 1, we go ahead and test it monthly, and we do that on our own. That's not through the regulatory, but we keep on top of it to test it and see where we're at. So
I'd like to thank you for your question. The district is, we do not just rigorously follow the schedule that's required by the state of California or the EPA as far as water quality testing. We do quite a bit more than that. Typically, if we have a problem or if we have a concern about a well, then that well will be sampled at a much higher frequency. If we were in an area where we were near contamination, the frequency of sampling would go up quite a bit further. Typically, if we do have a well with a concern, we may sample as, if we get, especially if you get a detection in a well, then you'd get, we would pull immediately after that, we can pull a confirmatory sample, and then we may even take a third sample to confirm the confirmatory sample to verify that there is a problem. And then if there is a verified problem, then we would sample. I have seen this in the past, again, with going back to when we had MTBE contamination, weekly sampling, and then depending on how that goes and what the results are from that, then it may taper off and go to monthly and then a quarterly. So again, it's on a case-by-case basis. And so we sample, I guess, what we all feel is the necessary amount to protect our water supply.
And if you notice, remember the map, all of the district wells in the vicinity of the South Y were either destroyed or inactive since the early 90s.
The only other thing I did want to address through Evo's discussions was Lukens' consumer confidence reports are all located on our website. It's lukenswater.com. Just go to the CDPH tab and they're all there. Also, we use a third-party lab that's state of California certified and accredited. And then also the Division of Drinking Water website keeps all of public water systems data. So you can go there as well.
Just a quick.
We have 5 more minutes. Let's wrap up the questions that were submitted, and then we can have clarifying questions directly with the panel.
Okay, I have 4 cards and get through them fairly quickly here. When was the research published regarding toxicity to humans that you use for information? That information would have been published back likely in the 1980s when US EPA developed the drinking water standard for PCE. And where was it published? You could find it at US EPA. You could also likely find it with the State Water Resources Control Board Division of Drinking Water. And then, is this publication peer-reviewed? Yes. I can speak with knowing that the Division of Drinking Water, when they renew the drinking water standards, they do go through peer review. Next card. Do we know the primary source of the contamination, and have efforts been made to go after the insurance carrier who insured that property? Right now, as regarding the Lahontan Water Quality Control Board's efforts to identify sources, we've identified and issued a cleanup and abatement order to the Lake Tahoe, the responsible parties related to the Lake Tahoe Laundry Works facility. They have been ordered through that CAO or cleanup and abatement order to conduct and prepare a work plan for further investigating and identifying the full extent of their contamination or contribution to the contamination that's left their property. And we're working on getting that work plan finalized and then implemented. And that will be looking out actually to have them identify out to 0.5 parts per billion, which is an order of magnitude below the drinking water standard. That is who we have currently identified and have issued an order. I can tell you that staff is also beginning to reevaluate existing information that we have already and developing screening criteria in an effort to determine if there are other sources out there of PCE, and if that process was to identify other sources or potential sources, then we would bring those responsible parties into this program and effort to identify the extent of their contamination and bring them into the fold on remediating it also. The other thing that we are initiating or part of is we've received authorization and funding to develop and initiate an additional field investigation, again looking for additional sources. This is a very complex situation out there. There are multiple potential sources, parties that have used solvents and products that have contained PCE over the years. And so we're looking at the available data. We're trying to fill in maybe some data gaps, again, to do a better, more thorough job of identifying all the sources that have contributed to this contamination. As far as going after insurance carriers and stuff, that really falls to the property owners and their insurance company. It's not the responsibility of the state of California to go after the insurance companies. We are responsible for requiring responsible parties to do the appropriate investigation and then follow up with cleanup and abatement activities. The insurance issue is really between the property owner, responsible party, and their insurance carriers. I'll read this one. This again is back to insurance, but I'll read it to recognize that it's been reviewed and put out there to the public. Can a claim be filed with the insurance company now that insured the polluter some 40 years after the pollution occurred? Is there a statute of limitations that applies or does not apply? Again, that's really between the property owner, responsible parties, and their insurance companies, policies and stuff like that. Are EPA Superfunds still available? I cannot speak to U.S. EPA Superfunds funds or whether or not they'd be available for this situation. What you have heard throughout the night is that the state of California, largely through the State Water Resources Control Board, has been very active in working with the water purveyors to help them do feasibility studies, to look at facility plans, to be looking at getting treatment systems on board. So that funding is in there. The Lahontan Water Board is putting in, has increased the resources it's dedicating to this effort. We have a technical team now put together, and we have the most resources dedicated to investigating and seeing this through that we've ever had. So the state of California is bringing to bear quite a bit of resources in this effort, both from the state agency perspective and from helping the water purveyors out and the community, entering the community. Let's see. Final question on this card. Wouldn't drilling more wells in affected areas simply become contaminated by PCE? Well, that is, I would say, one of the reasons why, say, Lukens Brothers is doing a facilities plan, Tahoe Keys Water Company is looking at a facilities plan, feasibility studies, is to avoid that very situation. There are various levels of water and in areas, but special care would be given if the decision was made to put in new wells in this area. I'm speculating a little bit here that I doubt if you will see anything put really in any of the hot spots. And, but again, feasibility, that's what feasibility studies are for, is to come up with the best solution. Again, providing the community with safe drinking water now and into the future.
All those questions, and I kept waiting for somebody to say, how about skin absorption? Should we all go home and put filters on the shower or what?
Again, it's been said multiple times throughout the night, the water that you are being provided is safe. It meets all state drinking water standards, and it is safe.
Even if you're showering with it for 5 years and it keeps going on and you never get it down?
It's not in the water supply system that's coming through your faucets and your shower heads and into your washing machines.
Right, but you know how fast skin absorbs.
Again, the water supply for the community that you are being provided meets all drinking water standards and is safe. Final card, and this is a more or less, well, more specific on a continuing theme. What are other potential sites of contamination? A particular concern to me is the old Myers Marine site with a warning of contamination on the front door. What about all the other industrial sites in that corridor? One of the possible outcomes of the investigation that Lake Tahoe Laundry Work responsible parties are required to do could be the identification of additional sources. And as I said a few minutes ago, Water Board staff is also evaluating existing data and will be gathering new data in an effort to identify if there are any additional sources out there. And if there are new sources or additional sources identified, once we have the information, then that allows us to pursue similar action, such as cleanup and abatement order. We'll take such action and bring those responsible parties into the program. So, and that completes my list of questions.
All right, I think with that, I want to thank everyone for coming out. Clearly, this is a big issue for us as the water districts and you guys as our customers. We all drink this water every day. So water quality is really important. It's just past 7:30, so I'm going to wrap up the meeting. I know there will likely be follow-up questions, so our panel's here to answer them. There's business cards up front. If you aren't able to ask someone a question right now, you can, and you think of one later, you can email or call. And if you want information, notifications about future meetings or where we're at with the process, please sign in to the sign-in sheet so we have your contact information so we can keep you informed. Thank you to our panel for all your information, and thank you all for coming. We really appreciate it.